Hey, before we get going, today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Growers & Co. Have you checked out this site yet, growers.co? Have you picked up the magazine? Have you snagged one of their straw hats, shirt maybe? Because if not, you are missing out. Growers & Co. is a brand new brand from the brain of Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, and he and his team are designing products around the work we talk about on this show. Their stuff is well made and well fitted, designed precisely for growers by growers. There are tools and apparel and a magazine that are all designed around the needs of people growing food professionally. I've been rocking growers gear all winter, but I got to be honest, I'm a little bit looking forward to the heat of the summer this year when I can rock my straw hat again. Can you tell how much I love that thing? I love that thing. Anyway, learn more and support their work at growers.co. Today's show is also brought to you by BCS America.
BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just another rototiller, but these compact power units are truly superior pieces of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy, where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected by professional growers. Available for a fraction of the cost of four-wheel tractors, BCS will perform a lot of jobs more safely and efficiently than their four-wheel cousins. Jobs like shredding cover crops, spreading compost, and preparing seed beds in covered hoop houses without compacting soil, mowing on steep slopes with your feet safely on the ground, cutting grass and brush under fence lines and low trees, clearing snow on footpaths, and more. Don't just take our word for it. Join more than 2 million people in over 80 countries who have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. To learn more and find your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com.
Big thanks to our show sponsors. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 29, season 3. Got Mr. Jean-Martin Fortier back on the podcast this week to catch us up on Ferme, Quatre Temps, which we notably refer to throughout this conversation as FQT or FQT Farm. And we get pretty nerdy and get to hear about living pathway trials that JM has done. He catches us up on how the hedgerows are doing. We talk about the massive new boom in small-scale farms and what that could mean. We also discuss fertility management inside and outside of the tunnels. JM is a friend of mine and a mentor, and I think his perspective on farming right now is really great. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. But first, before we get started, make sure you pre-order a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, if you would like. It ships in July of 2021, and when you specifically order it from notillgrowers.com, the proceeds go to making you more content. And oh boy, is there more content coming. And I do not use that phrase, oh boy, lightly. This is the second to last episode of the season of this podcast, but there is so much more content on the way. So make sure to check out the book. That, again, is at notillgrowers.com, The Living Soil Handbook. Or if you're like, books are for nerds, then you can find other ways to support us there as well at notillgrowers.com/support. All right, enough from me for now. Let's get into this amazing conversation with the market gardener himself, Mr. Jean-Martin Fortier of Ferme, Quatre Temps. Jean-Martin Fortier, welcome back to the podcast.
Jesse, it's a pleasure to be here once more.
It is a pleasure to have you again. So, all right, well, catch us up a little bit. How much acreage are the gardens at FQT now, and has that changed at all in the last few years?
Acreage is around 7. No, it hasn't changed in the last 3 years. We have a new parcel that we put into production 3 years ago, and then we're still working on it. It was supposed to be for storage root crops initially to really complement what we do in the winter. We do a lot of greens in the unheated greenhouse in the winter, and it's just so much better when you have also roots to sell at the chefs or wherever. But and my goal with that was like a 2.5 acre parcel that I wanted to mechanize that part, the production system here. And I've never succeeded in mechanizing it, and I always come back to the strategies and the techniques that we use in the other field. And now this year we've just kind of incorporated into the crop planning, where it's just another field. It's not dedicated to the root crops anymore. It's just part of the big field. So we're about 6-7 and hasn't changed. What changes here at FQT Farm is the team. People are there for two seasons, and then they move on to start their own projects. And then we have a new batch of year number 1 coming in every year. We have 5 now, and we have 5 sticking for year 2 and 5 coming in. And that's what we've been up to the last few years.
I feel like one question I have to ask, because I've been asking it to everybody, and I feel like it's probably prominent for you, considering what your outlets have been up until this point. I'm thinking of Marché Jean Talon and the restaurants and those sorts of things in terms of how COVID affected your all's business and like how maybe that affected the farm. Yeah.
Funny, how some farms really took off. Like I know that in my network here in Quebec, like the CSA network we're kind of a federation. We're federated under the Réseau des Fermiers de Famille, which is like the family farmer network, and we're all branded as one brand. So that really helps. We do a lot of publicity in the media in the spring. And last year and this year, it was record sales for everyone. So CSA really took off. But for us here, which that wasn't, this at FQT Farm, it's never been what I wanted to do, mainly because I didn't want to come into competition with other farms. So we really took the restaurant industry, and we really present at Jean Talon, which was a farmer's market where there wasn't any clear regulation on if you're allowed to resell or not. So there's a lot of, booths there that aren't real farmers. And so we took that on. And long story short, last year we had 30% less sales. So we took a hit. The restaurant industry is completely shut down and it hasn't reopened almost in a year. Really dramatic on their end, really sad. A lot of my friends are in the restaurant business. A lot of chefs that I've been collaborating with in the last 6-7 years are kind of struggling. So for us, not so positive. But like in anything, it just kind of forced us to look at new things and try new stuff. So we opened up an online store, and that's working really. It started to work really well at the end of last year, and this year we're really set up to make it happen. So yeah, that's the news.
Yeah, so not jumping necessarily back into the CSA game, or is that part of, or are you unable to do that because of that federation you mentioned?
No, it's not that we're not able to do it. It's just, the farm here is special in the way that it's financed by, very wealthy businessmen. So, we're trying to come up with things that will help others, create new strategies, open up new channels. I don't want to just go and do like everybody else. And the farm has a lot of visibility also because I'm in the media a lot. We do a lot of, we had a TV show here and all of these things. And so really trying to open up new sectors. And so, for me, that's the DNA of the farm. And so the online store, and I know a lot of growers listening to the podcast probably took that route and are doing well with it. But for me, this was new, and how to also incorporate other products in the offer, because here at the farm, we also have a commercial kitchen. So we're doing a lot of canning. We're doing a lot of cool stuff. And with the online store, which is great, is that we can sell the meats, we can sell the other products just with the veggies. So we get orders from 50 to 150 per client, and that's pretty positive for us.
Yeah, that's great. I love that adaptation. In fact, one of the things that you told me, and you sort of mentioned it a minute ago, is that when you were originally starting FQT, you were you didn't want to take the business of the small farmers in the area. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit more and flesh out that idea of going straight at Marché Jean Talon?
Yeah, well, it's being sensible to the fact that other small farms are were trying to, make a name in themselves, and they're trying to compete in the space. And I have a lot of visibility and I have a lot of means here. And I really wanted to create a new channels, like I told you. And Jean Talon, which is an amazing farmer's market, probably one of the most amazing farmers market in North America. It's been around for 70 years, and there's a lot of great products there. But for some reason, in the last 15 years, there was a switch where it's open 7 days a week, and they made a lot of small changes over the years where you had to be there all these days, and then there's a lot of complications. So it ended up being a farmer's market where there's not a lot of farms that are bringing their own produce to the booth. It was mostly people buying it from bigger farms and coming down and selling them. And it wasn't obvious and it wasn't clear. And for me, that was kind of fraudulent in many ways. And it was really not the ethos of a real farmer's market. So we decided to take a booth, pay for 7 days, and be there only 2. And we made a big, big fat sign that says, everything here is grown by us. Check our nails. and we just started to, have the produce there, different style of display, pile high and watch it fly, all the things that I've been working on. And it's such a huge success. There's such a long line Saturday morning at 8:00 at our booth that other vendors started to check it out. And over the years, what happened is that it created somewhat of a ruckus. And we had a lot of people that kind of took notice. There was a few articles that were kind of telling the story of how it wasn't really ethical, that it wasn't clear where the produce were coming from. And on my TV show, we also explored that. There was big signs of some vendors saying, only local, and then they had bananas there, and it's just kind of ridiculous. And there was a culture change last year, and then I think out of the 70 vendors, 30 were booted out. And
wow.
then they created new places for smaller farms, and then you can be there now for only 1 day. And then, it's just we were part of creating this changes that change that needed to happen here at Chantalon. It's a pretty long story, Jesse, but in a nutshell, that's what happened.
Yeah, that's great. And and for people who've not been there, it's an open market that, it's open 7 days a week. It's kind of like it looks like, it's completely open. You can walk through it, you can get coffee and all of those things. And there's a bunch of shops around it. It's a really amazing market. It was kind of breathtaking when Hannah and I were there. And speaking of when Hannah and I were there, and this would have been October, I think, of 2019, we came to visit FQT and we saw this section, and I sort of think this is the section you were talking about wanting to mechanize. But you had these living, I think they were in white clover pathways.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was part of, kind of the running experiment, trying to figure out how to work the fields or not work the fields, because the reason why we don't have a lot of clover in our permabeds is because of the tarps. As we use the black tarps to kind of flip beds and prepare field lots. And that comes into conflict with the idea of having, permanent pastures or, grass or clover within the aisles. Because when you put the tarps for a few weeks, then you create a hit on the aisles. And so in that field, since I was trying to go more mechanized, longer rows, and my plan wasn't to use tarps. I was really trying to use tillage tools like discs and harrows, and really trying to take that route. We put the clover into the aisles and tried that for 3 seasons, and in the end came back to tarps and came back to less tillage and came back to less tractors. It's amazing. Like, I was having so much problems with the tractor all the time, laying out pellicle film, black film. it looks easy, but you really need to till the shit out of the beds, and you really need to shape them really square, so that when you go with the with the machine that spreads the plastic, then it's really tight, and then the drip tape, and it's just not. I was kind of being remembered why that wasn't the route I took, 15 years ago. And I just came back to what I know how to do good. And that's the story. So the aisles are no longer in clover, and I'm not sure that that's a great strategy. I think that that's a great strategy when you come in with a tractor, with a rotavator, or something that can really till the bed. Otherwise, the clover wants to go into the bed, and how you manage that, it becomes a problem. And then it can really compete with some of the water also in the bed if the beds are not raised. So, for me, it's not an ideal situation to have kind of living aisles. I'd rather have granule wood chip. I'd rather have compost being made there. That's more the style that I'm thinking is useful.
Yeah, we've been experimenting more and more with living pathways for the obvious benefits of living pathways, bringing the minerals, keeping the soil in place, the nutrients, constant photosynthesis and all those things. But those challenges of keeping it out of the bed without tarping it, I think that either is going to require new tools, or we may abandon it in a few years. We'll see. And you're right, it sucks up a little extra water.
But it looks great, and it feels good. And the thing is there's a lot of people that are going to always do the same experiments, like 5-10 years. Like probably a lot of new growers will be like, why don't we just put the clover into the bed and then plant into that? And the funny thing is that you try these things over the years, and then you figure out that it doesn't really work well, and then you adapt the system, you make changes, and then you come up with something that works for you. And sometimes you even forget why you're not doing these things that was trialed 10 years ago or whatever. But for me, I've seen pathways that are planted on other farms, and they always come with a big heavy tillage implement on the beds. That's when I saw them together working somewhat well. And I really think that the pathways, they're a great place to create or to put organic matter and to create compost more than living mulch. But again, that's kind of my personal take on it.
Right. Yeah. You described it to me that way once, that when you put those ramial chips down and you kind of leave them for the season, in some ways that's sort of that's like one form of composting. Yeah.
And if I have more time, I would put, grass clipping, or I would put leaves, or I would put, whatever crop debris in the aisles, because we raise our beds and the aisles are lower, it's a great setup to have more humidity there. And then when we raise the beds again, we use a Bertha plow, and then all that organic matter, all that carbon comes back into the bed, composted. And it's always also, the pathway for me is a great way to inoculate the bed with mycelium, because we only walk on the aisles. We don't do any light tillage at all. So, and I think, the mycelium component is also really, really interesting when we're talking about living soils. And so that's my take on where I can inoculate and play with that. It's in the aisle. So for me now, they have a specific, reason, and I'm trying to figure out ways where I'm not investing too much time on something that will be beneficial on that end. I'm trying to find the balance between, working 8 to 5 and making the farm, really efficient, and having a living soil perspective with mycelium into the garden at all times. So granule wood chip plays that role.
Yeah, I think that's great. Speaking of living soil, I want to kind of dedicate some of this conversation to talking about fertility management, because you're doing it on such a scale. both outside and inside the greenhouses. I'm sure there's somewhat of a difference in how you manage those two things. Do you want to talk about some of the tools that you use for fertility management, or maybe even just like a general philosophy?
Yeah, well, I think the greenhouse is a bit different because we grow pretty intensively in the greenhouse, and we measure fertility biweekly, and then we really put more into. But in the fields, for me, in all my years of doing this, it all boils down to having a good fertility program. And so for me, a good fertility program is understanding that different families of crops require different fertility. So some brassicas require more phosphorus and less potassium, and all of these things. Kind of general guidelines that you can find pretty much anywhere, and just making sure that this is connected to the overall crop rotation. And so you're trying to put what's needed at a given point in time with regards to the crop. And for me, I'm still big on compost. We use a lot of compost, and we supplement it with fast-acting nitrogen like chicken manure, alfalfa meal, and slowly I'm thinking about basalt. Is that how you say that in English?
Basalt?
Not sure. Yeah.
Is it a rock mineral?
Yeah, it's a rock mineral that's really high in the silice, which contains a lot of micronutrients. But again, anytime I play on that end, it's like I'm doing this because I think, but it's not giving me clear results because it's hard to measure. I always see that as some of it's like a target. We kind of want to be we don't know exactly if what we're doing is perfect, bang on with regards to crop requirement and what's there in the soil. We don't want to over fertilize because that's not good. It creates pollution, but we want to be as close as possible on target. And the bullseye is, my take on it is I don't want to be super far away. So I use a little bit of the common science that's out there, and then we see in the field if what we're doing works. And over the years, we kind of adjust to what we see.
And then in reference to common science, you're talking about soil testing and those sorts of things?
Yeah, soil testing, just kind of the general guidelines that are there per regions on fertility requirements per crop. Actually, conventional farming has really nailed it on that end with regards to what the crop needs. And then a lot of the organic, like Rodale has a lot of information about that. Like it has a lot of information about which organic fertilizer or amendment can give you what each crop needs, and taking into consideration what was grown previously on your bed, taking into consideration some of the information from soil sampling. All of this comes together, and again, it gives you somewhat of a target to aim for, and it's very loose for me. Like I've had so many discussions with agronomists over the year that are very geeky and techie about this, but I'm like, this is all based on models that are generalized. It needs to be also what you see in the field. Does the crop look healthy? Is it parasited by aphids, which would be you're fertilizing too much? There's all sorts of things that you need to kind of see with your eyes, and then you make the adjustments. But yeah, that's the thing.
And then contrast that a little bit with the tunnels. So in the tunnels, are you doing like intensive sap analyses and those sorts of things, or what's that look like?
We're not doing sap analysis. I've never had. What we have is a meter, is a EC reader that we use in the greenhouse, and that gives us the electrical conductivity in the soil, which is connected to the amount of fertility that's there. And so we measure that every week, and then we see, and the EC reader is also connected to a guideline, a number, and if it's below that number, that means that you need to add more fertility for your tomatoes. And so we do that every week, and then that gives us a clear picture of how much the plant is taking up the nutrients that we're putting into the ground when we fertilize on a bi-weekly basis. And so we're fractioning the fertility. Instead of putting 1 or 2 or 3 hefty doses, we put a little bit every second week to really make sure that we're putting what the plant is taking, so that we're not over-fertilizing the beds over the years. And the EC reader is not complicated, and a lot of growers don't know that it exists. In the master class, there's a whole tutorial about how to use it and why. And these are the tools that we all kind of need to adopt, because it avoids you kind of fertilizing blindly. And I think there's going to be more and more growers using an AC reader, perhaps even in the field. In my opinion, and that's just an opinion, I think this is more useful than leaf analysis. But that's just my take on it.
Well, I think that, the one problem with the sort of leaf analysis, even if you're using a refractometer or something to measure the bricks, it doesn't give you enough information. It doesn't give it to you very quickly. Like, you have to send it off to a lab, and that's limiting.
And there's an expense there. And, perhaps, Jesse, we'll get to a point, perhaps soon, that if your crop or if your veggies are, it's kind of scientifically demonstrated that they're more nutrient dense, you can ask a better price for them. But I don't think we're there yet. And so we're assuming that what we're doing, and when we're using the refractometer and looking at the bricks, we're assuming that the crop is more healthy, more, has more density in it. But it's not very clear, and it's a science that is not proven beyond any doubt, and there's not a clear market exactly for that. And so all this extra effort, for me, it's not at the point where it's a science that has proven itself beyond doubt, and there's a clear market of people that are willing to pay a bit more for that. And I haven't jumped personally on that bandwagon myself. And I think there's issues of social justice in there, and I think there's all sorts of, there's all sorts of things to talk about when we talk about that. But
yeah. There's so much in there.
We won't have enough in an hour to cover everything. We should talk for like a day.
That'd be great. We need a day-long podcast. Something else that I want to talk about that I know everybody else is going to want to hear about, and I know you get asked about a lot, the hedgerows. How are they doing? I feel like I'm asking about a pet, but how are your hedgerows doing, JM?
The hedgerows are doing fantastic. They're coming to life because, spring spring arrived 2 weeks ago. So they're coming alive, and then there's a lot of birds nesting in them right now. And which is really the miracle of the spring here. We're so fortunate to have 4 seasons where we live. And when spring arrives and the birds come to nest, there's so much noise, there's so much flying around. It's so beautiful. And they're doing great. They're still acting as windbreak, which is really handy now. There's a lot of wind come springtime. And so far, the only kind of concern that we've had with them is we need to trim them down every other year, because they tend to kind of want to grow and expand, and so we just cut them back. That's not very long. We use a kind of a big shrub trimmer. We trim them down, and they were chosen to be able to take a cut, so they'll just regrow. But the farm is beautiful. It's definitely a signature of the farm, and we're getting to the point where we'll be able to translate into English, the procedures that we followed here, the guidelines, the design. My hope is to be able to share that in the coming year. And I was also telling you about a really, really, really good book on hedgerows that was just published in France. I'll send you the link to the book. Unfortunately, it's in French. But I think in France they have they've put a lot of work with regards to hedgerows, because the hedgerows, they come from there. Traditionally there was hedgerows everywhere in rural France in the 20th century and early 21st century. And so there's the historical something about it. And in my opinion, hedgerows are amazing. They bring a lot of diversity. They bring a lot of beauty. They act as windbreak, and they bring birds back to the farm. We had been doing a 5-year experiment on measuring what kind of insects are there close to the hedgerows and what's the impact of this. Unfortunately, with COVID, the experiment didn't happen last summer, and it's not going to happen this summer again because we're not having any visitors at the farm. So that's kind of delaying the process. But anytime I talk about the hedgerow, Jesse, I tell people, they're amazing. I love him. Such a great project. Happy we did it. I would do it again, but I'm not paying for them, and that's the point that's important. If you're investing, $20,000 into something like that, perhaps you need to ask yourself, should I be investing $20,000 in other stuff that would make the farm more productive on the short term?
Do you think that's what it costs to get those up on 7 acres?
Oh yeah, more than that. Just the plants, just buying the shrubs, the landscaping to do the, we used a lot of permaculture principles that did not work to implement the hedgerows. A lot of it was putting soil that didn't have any seeds, like more sterile soil, and then putting wet cardboard, and then planting the shrubs into that, and then putting a lot of ramial wood chip over everything and putting grass on all of that. So all of these steps were kind of an expense, and the design was that there wouldn't be any weeds ever. Okay, and that didn't work. there was weeds, and it's just, that was, I think, overthought and overkill. And I think the shrubs would have done just as well in just like regular soil, and perhaps we could have put in burlap, and that was that.
Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to get a word from our sponsors like Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil makes NOP-compliant living potting soils in Cleveland, Ohio, with food scraps they haul and compost themselves. Each batch of soil is tested against the competitors, and the results are in. Plants vote for Tilth Soil. To learn more about their full line of products, please visit www.tilthsoil.com. This show is also brought to you by you, the patrons. We just hit 600 patrons at patreon.com/no-till-growers, and that is super rad, and we hope it will keep growing. As always, at certain levels, you get a shout out, or if you bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out. So amazing shout out list this week, y'all. Big shout outs this week to Jeffrey Ballard, Matt Ladegard, Cody Gerbala, Teo Canino, Ari Slicker, William, Josh Sattin, Paul D. Salvatera, Clansran Salee, Edward P. Fitzpatrick, John Bonaparte, Oh Hi Roots, Scott Harris, Dan Fort, Earth Care Farmer Jane Murner Cynical, Asia Smith, Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, Scott Snodgrass, Andrew and Haley Keeler of Avoda Sustainable Acres, Jody Miller, Shane and Emma of Aslan Organics, Tony Lopez, Clement, Thomas Eliason, Travis and Heidi of Arcadia Acres, Judson Taylor, John Mills, Grown Up Farm, Jacob Arthur, Clara Coleman, Wild Mountain Seeds, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexhamshire Organics, Jared Kirst, Jay Armour, Dan Brisebois, C. Mac Small, Jay McCombs, Tim Baldwin, Marc-Andre Giroux, Jessica Merrick, Esoterra Culinary, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Jean-Martin Fortier, Yannick Laplante, and Jen Lawrence. Huge thanks to all of our show supporters. All right, back to JM. Yeah, it's funny because one of our Patreon members, I always ask Patreon, if they have any questions, and Seth Stallings had asked about, anything you'd do differently. Like, what about bed width, or like, are they wide enough? Are they the right size? Like, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think they're the right size. The way they're. If people want to check them out, you can Google Ferme Quatre Temps, FQT farm. You'll see a lot of image of them on the website or just like probably on Google Image. You'll see a lot of them. But the field blocks are 12 beds. So the beds here are 4 feet center to center. So pathways are 18-inch, beds are 30-inch, 48-inch, and then there's 10 of them. I said 12, but there's 10. And then there's the hedgerow on the side. And then the hedgerow, the reason why there's a field block of 10 beds and then a hedgerow is that, from researching hedgerows, we know that they can cover up to 10 times the span, protecting. So if the hedgerows are 5 feet high, then they'll protect against wind, 50 feet wide. So that was the reason why they were spaced that way. And they're also a great barrier for some of the insects not to migrate from one block to the other. A lot of insects, they crawl. And so that helps us in our crop rotation, making sure that one block is one botanical family, and then it's divided by the hedgerow, and then on and so forth. But it's very nebulous to really give a clear, exact scientific, rationale for doing something like that. It's really beauty's in it, adding diversity to the farm, creating ecological niches. All of this comes into play. And I know we've talked about this, the importance of beauty on our farms. It's, for me, especially as I grow older now, it's like so important. The farm is not just like an industrial process where I'm just, growing crops and selling crops. It's also my way of life. It's also where I am. It's, listening to birds and seeing birds for me, makes me happy, and seeing all the butterflies that are there and seeing all of the insects buzzing, all of this for me is why I got into farming in the first place. And so the hedgerows symbolize that, and that's why they have an important place, in my garden.
Yeah, it's funny when Hannah and I came up to visit, and we went to Grelinette and stayed there. Which is your home farm for anyone who's listening that doesn't know that. But it's one of the most famous farms in the world, and it's one of my favorite farms I've ever been to. Like, you've made it this very homey place that's really beautiful. And one of the topics that you and I talked about that weekend was wildness, and how as soon as we got to Montreal, like, everything in Canada is more wild than it is in the United States. Like, we mow everything here, but specifically your farms are with the hedgerows and with the ecological little areas with the little ponds, and then your home farm, it's got like this certain wildness to it, but I love it. Do you want to talk, you just kind of did, but do you want to talk a little bit more about like how that plays into your idea of beauty on a farm?
Yeah, I think for us, we got into farming because, we like ecology and we like being outside. And, over the years, I've also understood that I also like the business side of farming. And that came into play at one point. But for me, landscaping the farm was a big reason why I was interested in farming, because I was coming at it from a homestead perspective where, you move rocks and you create things, and then you fabricate your environment. And crafting the farm, especially grelinette, where, if we put ourselves back, that was in 2004, I had never seen a farm, Jesse, where people were working on permanent raised beds, except for those that I had seen in Cuba. And so all of this was kind of new, and we knew that we wanted to have a lot of space dedicated to wildlife, attracting native pollinators, making sure that we have protection for bees and butterflies, and learning about all of this, but also just kind of crafting it, making it. That for me was really, really fun. And then the kids today, my kids or the kids that come to the farm, they walk around and they see butterflies and they see the bees, and then we hear the toads and we see the frogs, and that's all there, plus extra productive, intensive, high delivery production system. So for me to have both is really the future of small scale farming. And my dream would be, Jesse, that we get somehow there's a mechanism that allows us to get funded directly because of this ecological service that we're doing. And I think that's a possibility. I think that's down the road.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there's a lot of reason that would be helpful. I mean, there's some debate about whether or not we should pay people for carbon capture, but also, we have like insect die-outs, and I always hear, I don't know how much science there is to this, but when I was growing up, I remember driving, every time we would drive at night, we would have to get home and wipe the bugs off of our car because there were so many insects. And now that doesn't happen. And I always think about, insect die-offs, bird population decreases, monarch butterflies, and those sorts of things. Those are incredibly important. And to have farms that are dedicated to that ecology, I think is huge.
Yeah, I think, it supports the bountiful of the farm. It maintains healthy plant communities, provides food for other wildlife, and beautifies the landscape. So all of this for me makes so much sense. The question is, this costs money. And so who pays for that? And some seasoned growers now have some, more legway, and then they can invest in that. But I think somehow it should be either funded through government money, or we should get reimbursed or remunerated for this ecological services that we're doing to the landscape. And I think this is going to happen down the line. I certainly hope so, and I have a few projects that are in that way also down the road.
Yeah. I mean, I wish there was more of that dedicated from the state, of having more ecological areas, and then perhaps paying farmers to do more of those sorts of things, because there are some small programs around, but I think that should be a greater focus. In that vein, I'm sort of going to ask this question. This is what we've been talking about in a different way, perhaps, but I think it's an interesting way of asking this question. One comes from one of our Patreon members, Nicholas Franz. He's kind of interested in hearing your personal feelings, thoughts, and opinions between, your original farm and the larger scale project. Like, how do you kind of think about those two different farms?
One is work and the other is home. I'm probably one of the few farmers that commute to one farm from his farm to go work on another. It's been really positive, Jesse. Honestly, 100% positive. Madeleine, you met her when you came down.
Yeah, love Madeleine.
She really took flight when I kind of left the farm. She really took control of everything, and she just, that was really positive for her, because she got to really do things that she wasn't doing before. She didn't, perhaps she didn't think she was capable of doing them, but now she's been doing it for so long. She's doing it really well. And the farm is doing what it needs to do, which is feeding people, and it's creating a nice income, a super quality of life, and people that are there are happy. It's, the farm is doing what it's supposed to do at La Grelinette year after year. And, Madeleine is still kicking tires. She's working, 40, 50 hours a week in the garden, running the business, making it work, and she's happy. That's what she likes to do. And me, I'm really happy at the other farm, because training the new generation of growers and being with them in the process of this farm here, which the farm is designed where every season we know that we've planned a lot more that is possible of doing. So we overbooked the farm in many ways. The objectives are so high. The production calendar is so intensive. The level of expertise that we have on all these it's the same system as the other farm. We're not doing anything different, but the scale and the scope and the intensity and the pressure is there, so that people, when they come here, they learn how to deal with all of this extra production, extra pressure, extra managing people, communicating with others, dealing with problems, solving issues. All of this comes into play. And, you know, I'm really pleased because after 2 years on this farm, the people that leave here, they're really, really good growers. And so that's what that farm allows me to do, is to invest more time into not just like the production and the sustainability of the farm, financial, whatever, spiritual, but also I can really push limits and really embark on an adventure with a new cohort of apprentices that come here for 2 years. And when they leave, it's amazing. And so that's something that I could not do at my own farm. And that's, you know, that's a part of farming that I really, really appreciate and enjoy.
Yeah, and there have been several great offshoots, like Food and Bowl, I know is one. Who are some other ones that have started farms?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's about 20, 25 farms that have been generated from the program here.
Wow.
And or people that are working in food policies, and, you know, people, you know, we have Baptiste in Chambord. He's like he gets the highlight because he started the Market Garden at Chambord, which is with Versailles, the most visited castle in France. And so there's a big FQT like farm in Chambord with hedgerows and it's the whole system down there. And he gets national attention every week in the media because he's the director. Chambord is like super big. It's like if the White House would have an FQT market garden.
The White House should have an FQT market garden. That would be great.
That's a project that I'd like, actually.
There we go.
I'll leave it to others. Or Danny, I don't know if you had met Danny. Danny was with me for 3 years now. He started an online course for gardeners. He teaches them how to garden, but with all the techniques, the strategies, the tools that we've developed here. There's another woman, Alice, that she's the head of the organic farm school now. So there's been all sorts of offshoots, and that really makes me happy.
Yeah, that's so great. Is Quebec still offering that sort of $20,000 start?
Yeah, 20 to 40.
Oh, wow. Did that go up, or has it always been 20 to 40?
It's always been 20 to 40, and we've been really fighting for it to stay. It really makes a big difference. And the beauty of that program is because it's the same for any farmers of any trade. So obviously, when you're inheriting or taking over the cow farm from your parents, it's like if you have 60 or 80 cows, it's probably a $5, $6, $7, $8 million farm. And so to get 40 grand isn't that much. But if you're starting a 1.5 acre market garden, 40 grand is a lot.
Yeah.
But it's fair. It's fair for both because it's the same amount of money. The small scale farmers have really benefited from that, and I'm really lobbying so that it stays that way, because for me it shows that, you know, with the same level of investment, small farms can really go a long way versus big farms that need always more capital, always more investment, and in the end, you know, they get all of the funding, they get all of the money. But small farms, if you multiply them, and that, you know, I think that's the future.
Well, you told me, I think at one point, that you felt like Quebec probably has the highest concentration of maybe even just the best farms, like the best bio-intensive farms in the world, because of programs like that.
Well, I wouldn't say the best, because I think there's a lot of talent everywhere, but the number is certainly quite high. You know, there's a farm school here that teaches market gardening and bio-intensive practices, but not only, you know, the students, they're there for 3 years and they see different systems, but there's probably in Quebec, you know, there's 8 million here in Quebec There's probably 20 to 30 new farms every year. It's the first year, Jesse, the first year that the census here in Quebec shows us that there's more new farms than farms closing. It's the first year in 50 years.
Wow.
So there's really a resurgence of people wanting to be in the countryside, starting farms, and the farmers that are starting, they're much better than when I started. When I started, I had Elliott's book. That's pretty much it. Now there's programs, there's farms to see, there's a market for it. There's so much more that for me it's just I think we're showing that small scale farming is changing the world, which is what I've been dreaming about for 20 years,
Yeah. And I think that's amazing. I think that people, here in America, we certainly have a huge decline in farmers. The age of the population continues to go up. It hasn't really, given the last census, I don't think there was much of a dent in that. There probably won't be in, the next census either. But hearing of programs like that, and there's probably other factors in there as well. I mean, like you said, there's a lot more information now than there was 10 or 15 years ago. But I think that's really promising to see, maybe Quebec could be a standard in that way.
Well, I think we do some things differently, some things better, something not as good because I always compare. I go to Europe and I go to a lot of places. I used to go to a lot of places in the States before the shutdown, but there's definitely a technical skill set here, especially with greenhouse production, and there's a level of technicity, I don't know if I can say that is really high here.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly would be worthwhile for groups of farmers from different places in the U.S. to do a trip and come and see 4, 5, 6 farms here in Quebec, how they operate. Because what's great about Quebec and what makes it kind of different is that, because of the fact that we speak French, a lot of the influence comes from France and from Europe. And we are also heavily influenced by what's going on in the U.S. And so we're kind of working on both fields here, and I think that's a good thing because there's a lot of great growing happening in Europe, obviously, and there's a lot of ingenious and really clever growers in the U.S. also. So to be able to tap into both, I think gives us a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong about the statistic, but I think I saw that the second highest producer of tomatoes in the world is Canada. So like greenhouse production is incredibly advanced up there.
Yeah, and the other thing, I don't remember if we had time to visit that when you came. I don't think we did, but just outside of FQT farm here, there's a lot of black earth, black soil. These are old swamps that were drained. Anyway, so outside of California, the area here is the second largest producer of vegetables in North America.
Wow.
So big farms, like 400 Latino workers picking celery in the field. And then just like in California. And so there's also that plays because there's a lot of R&D going on down there. There's a lot of research that was done. There's a lot of, a company like Dubois. Dubois is highly specialized, and they have so many talented and skillful technicians because, they have all these big farms right there. And so all of this comes into play. And but I would not say that it's better. It's just different. And I don't want to be chauvinistic.
No, that's good. I think that's a good clarification. I didn't want to put words in your mouth. Okay, so Growers & Co. has been a huge supporter of ours this year, and we are super appreciative of that. And I wanted to highlight one of the things that maybe let you talk about Growers & Co. a minute, but I wanted to highlight one of the things that Growers & Co. is doing that I think is super cool, and it's the magazine. I think it's super unique and something that kind of has been needed for our industry for a long time, just sort of more about the culture of what we're doing. And I was just looking at the e-galley that you sent me for the next issue, and it's just unbelievable how much, how great of a job you all are doing of sort of bringing this thing to life. Do you want to talk a little bit about, the sort of goals with the magazine and then the goals with Growers & Co. as a whole?
Yeah, that's, as you know, you were one of the first ones to be with Growers 6-7 years ago. It's always been the dream of mine to create a brand that would represent who we are as a tribe of like-minded people, a small-scale farming community. There's so many things that, because I travel a lot and I've seen in so many places the values and the similarities, and also the super fresh and cool and happening people that are out there doing cool stuff. And I wanted to just show that. And so that's why the magazine came about. And it's really, it's really dedicated to the pioneers. So I want to tell the stories of the pioneers, but it's also mostly about the emerging, small scale farmers that are out there doing awesome stuff and telling their story. So for me, it's a way to show who we are, to share it, and to put it in the light where it's actually, it's as cool when you read it as when you see it for real. It's not lame, it's like when I do an article about you and about the podcast or about whatever, it's like I want to make sure that when people that are perhaps non-farmers or other farmers that perhaps don't know you, they look at that and they understand how it's amazing what you're doing. And that was really the goal that I had as the editor of the magazine, the founder of the magazine. And it's written by growers for growers, and it's all about growers. And I'm super proud of Growers 2 is coming out next week. And, the hard part is to having people know that it exists. So I'm encouraging everyone listening to this podcast, if you could invest $20 and check it out and tell your friends about it, that would make a big, big difference for me, because I'm putting all my heart into this and I really want to see it fly. And I think it's going to have a positive impact, because it's putting a spotlight on our community and the importance of our work. But it's tough. It's tough to create a new project and get traction. So I'm playing at that now.
I think it's great. And I also encourage people to go check that out at growers.co. We'll make sure to hook it up with the links in the show notes.
I think Growers also, we're doing tools. I think the tools are amazing. Honestly, these are all the designs that a lot of the things are not so new. Stirrup hose really are similar to that are made by Glazer. The broad fork, I've put my own little kind of twist into the broad fork. I think it's the best all-around broad fork. But also, wire weeders. We're also doing all sorts of little things according to my designs and my liking. They're crafted here in Quebec. Well, that's pretty cool. And the farmwear. The farmwear, a lot of people don't really know why I'm into that. And some growers are like, I'm not sure, JM, about that. But, I think, Jesse, what we wear to work. So for me, the farmwear it makes so much sense, because what we wear is, like I was saying, it's like who we are, but it's very functional. Like the pants that I wear in the fields for 8 to 10 hours a day, if they're well crafted and if they have knee pads and they're designed for me to be able to be on my knees and not hurt myself, whatever, all these little details for me, they matter. And so to be able to have a collection of designs and pieces of clothing that are specifically tailored for market gardening, for small scale farming. Some people don't see the connection there, but I do. And also, there's also this thing, and I'd like to hear you about that, Jesse. There's also this question of prideness, okay? Because when we're in the field, we're dirty and all, blah, blah, blah. But when you go to the store, or when you go to the coffee shop, or whenever you leave your farm, just to put your coat, you put your Growers & Co. coat, and you feel good and you look good, and there's that for me is not nonsense. That's important. There's something in there that I think I want to touch. And that's one of the reasons why I got into farmwear.
Yeah, I mean, being able to show what you do for a living and being proud of what you do for a living and having a brand that sort of represents that, I think is cool. I mean, I think that other industries have that, and farming has kind of just been, you walk into a shop dirty or whatever, and you're like, yeah, I'm a farmer. But I like the idea of having something you can be like, yeah, I'm a farmer. I look good, and this is what I do for a living.
Yeah, because my grandfather, okay, he used to sell insurance to farmers, okay, and he would tell me stories when I was starting in farming. He would tell me stories. So farmers at that time, when they would go to the store, they would always change. They would never go into the store wearing their overalls because it was all a question of prideness. They're out they're dirty in the fields, but they would go and buy, bolts and nuts, and they would change and they would dress up to go to the store. And he was telling me these stories of how people were before, and I was like, I get it. There's something about, we're outside. That's great. We want to have technical clothing that protects us. That's great. We want to be comfortable. That's great. But we also want to be proud of who we are, and we never want to have anyone tell us that we're subpar or that what we're doing is not as important as a lawyer or a banker or whatever. And I think what we do is just as important, and colors and how we represent that matters.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's that. There's a lot of new technical clothing coming up, with the knee pads and shirts and long sleeve shirts that protect you from the sun, hats. It's all coming up. It's really slow to create collections like that, and I've had to really connect and hook up with people that have strong expertise, and it's been a whole process to kind of learn about all this, but it's all coming up in the new collection that's going to be mid-May. But that's something that I'm planning on doing for the years to come, and hopefully people will like it, appreciate it, and support it.
Absolutely. Well, JM Fortier, thank you so much for your time.
We should plan another one of these. It goes too fast. I
know, the hour is so fast. It's too fast.
Can I have one more minute?
Oh, absolutely.
No, it's just I definitely don't want to hang up with you before I congratulate you on your book, The Living Soil Handbook. I've read it. I've had an uncorrected proof copy. It's in my hands right now. So I've read it. Maud-Hélène has read it. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's really well written, and I think that all that you've been kind of talking about, sharing, researching, discovering, you've inked it down into a game book, a guideline that is easy to understand and relatable. And I think growers that will read your book will really get it.
That's awesome to hear, JM.
Yeah, I want to congratulate you for that. And I'm not just saying that because, I get a lot of these books, and I think this one is special and different. And it's a book that talks. It's a talkable book. I can hear you when I read it.
That's great. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's awesome to hear.
And yeah, I think all the podcasts with all the branches and Clara Coleman and Josh Sattin and everyone participating, I think that's great. And anyway, I just wanted to throw it out there that I think all of this is wonderful, and I hope that everyone listening to this is getting what they need out of it. And I'm just happy that our movement is expanding and growing, and people are on board.
I agree. I mean, can I throw one more super tiny but also giant question at you?
Sure.
So one thing that's I think it'll air right before this podcast goes up. I think I'll put it up on Sunday. So, hey, before I continue on with this question, I just want to clarify here that I'm talking about a YouTube video that we just put up. It will not appear in any podcast feed. It's just a long form YouTube video for the moment that you can find at the no-tillgrowers.com YouTube channel. Yep. So people will have already heard it, but Josh Sattin and he was here shooting some stuff at our farm, and we kind of decided to sit down with a microphone and talk about this, that we kind of feel like we're in a major boom for agriculture. And it's bigger than what we've been seeing for the last 15 years, since the farm to table movement, of the aughts. This is like, I was at Earth Tools talking to Joel, and he hasn't taken a day off in a year. And you look at how backed up people like, people that sell tools and farm equipment, like the bigger stuff, the Caterpillar tunnels and those sorts of things, and everybody got really backed up last year. But when that's the sort of story has been that, it's a lot of backyard gardening is blowing up, but those are not the kind of things that a backyard gardener necessarily is going to buy. And so we kind of had this discussion about, are we on the precipice of like a really massive small farming boom? And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that and what you've seen.
Oh, I have an opinion about that.
Okay.
It's amazing that you guys are talking about that, because I was at Dubois last week, and 2 years ago they built this huge, depot space and office space. It was huge. I was like, wow. And I was there last week, and they said, we need to double it. And, we're back order on so many things. And these are not things for, home gardeners. These are, row covers, insect nets. These are, everything irrigation related. So, and, they sell throughout North America, but it's obvious that there's a boom, and it's not just a small boom, it's a big boom. And for me, we've been part of that. Eventually I'll be like Elliot is, I'll be an old pioneer, like an old duder about these things. But I've always thought, Jesse, that this would happen. And I don't think there's nothing stopping it. And I think we're winning in many ways. And I think we're deconstructing the centralized economy. And I think we're getting people out of stores like Whole Foods. That's what needs to happen. We need to start, when we're talking about local food systems, how they're resilient in climate change, how they are more humane in many ways. I think that's what's starting to happen. And the reason is there's an economic incentive for you to start a farm, because you can grow something that you can sell. You don't need to be part of, a corporation that needs to hire you and blah, blah, blah. You can just kind of do it. And I think with what just happened in the last year with the coronavirus and Donald Trump and just like the whole world economy kind of being on pause and just people reflecting on these things. Yeah, I think, we're going global.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a symptom of for me, a good direction. So it's happening. It's on.
Yeah. What does it bring? What does it bring with it?
Yeah, I think it brings new opportunities for a lot. I've always thought personally that if we bring it back to small scale farming, I think society is being transformed with social justice right now, and it's being transformed in many ways because we are deconstructing the global system and we're rethinking about local systems and how to invest in them. And I think that's happening right now. But if we're circling back to small scale farming, I think what's going to happen is that the fact that there's more people wanting to do it, it's going to attract more people to the issue. It's going to grow the pie. So a lot of growers are very worried, thinking there's going to be so many new growers into the space. But if everybody's tailoring, if everybody's selling directly, it's all about connection. It's all about meeting people. It's all about interaction. That's what drives small scale farming. And that's the value proposition that we have and that big ag doesn't. It's like we personalize the products. And so the more people are into that, then the more people are engaged personally in local food sheds. And I think that's how we need to see it. The more farmers out there, the better, because that means they're growing the pie. They're pollinating different places, talking to more people, and then we're rounding more and more and more people to the case of big ag is a failure, small scale farming is an alternative. And I think that's my headspace now. I'm thinking about these things, and I think we're reliving a revolution right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be massive, and I'm very curious what the next 10 years are going to look like in our space.
Yeah, and food security is, I think there's going to be room for everyone. And the model, Jesse, of market gardening, of small scale farming, where the goal is not to scale up. That's really the key. Because if your goal is to always scale up and grow volumes and have tiny margins on volumes, then obviously competition becomes a problem. But if that's not your goal, at La Grelinette, we have the same number of clients for 15 years. And we've been making better margins, and we've been making more money, and the prices rises, and the investments that we've made are fully capitalized now. We're making more money. I think we need to have more people talking about that. That's the model. The model is, don't go for volume. Go for just like a business case that is lean, direct sell everything, and just kind of, nobody can compete with La Grelinette, not because we're famous, but because the clients are almost our friends. We have 200 clients, 250 clients. They know us. We know them. We grow what they want to eat. They're willing to pay. Multiply this by 10,000 farms like those, and we have a system that is really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe we talked about this the last time we talked, but big people just can't compete on the relationship side. We have that in our quarter. It's a huge thing that we can always hold over any big grower, is that we can build relationships with our customers.
Yeah, and because there's going to be more small farms, there's going to be more small tool makers. We already see that now, you and I. There's companies now, Curly Ag from Australia just sent me a really cool flame weeder and a cool tilter. And there's more people in that space. So it's innovation, it's creativity. And it's like, for me, like, this is the golden age. And perhaps I'm kind of bright-sided and perhaps naive, but I don't really see the negative of that. For me, the negative is big ag, and big ag needs to be destroyed. It needs to be overhauled. It's very negative. So, yeah. And, Growers & Co., the magazine, wants to explore this, where we're going,
Yeah, that's great. Well, JM Fortier, this has been an absolute pleasure. We've got to do this more often.
Yes. And be well. And I hope everyone listening is well, and keep up the great work. I think what we're doing is changing the world, and let's just keep doing it.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Jean-Martin Fortier and Growers & Co. on all the platforms, but also please sign up for that magazine, the Growers & Co. magazine. You can do that at growers.co. It is truly an exceptional publication, and this latest issue features no-till growers family member Clara Coleman of the Winter Growers podcast, and so many other great writers and people. So check that out. Also check out, while you're at it, Clara's podcast, the Winter Growers podcast. You can also check out No Till Flowers podcast with Jenny Love and Growers Live with host Josh Sattin. We also have the Collaborative Farming podcast coming up soon. With that is going to be hosted by Jackson Roulette. We do a lot of stuff around here. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must have the curse words bleeped out, but not because you don't love cussing, you genuinely love using swear words, but because there may be young kids listening with their parents in the wash pack shed because, farming with kids. Anyway, big thanks as always to Jackson Roulette and Josh Sattin for their help. Thanks as always to Mr. Swear Word, Willie Breeding, for the theme music. Thanks times a million to my wife and partner in the world, Hannah Crabtree, for being amazing. Thank you all for listening and also being amazing. We'll see you next week. Bye.
I want to talk about anything you want. I'm super open. I'll share what I know and what I think about these things. And you're the guy. You make the call. You decide. I'm at the service of whatever.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we'll just see where it goes then.